I was just like manic mode, like going through customs, getting to my gate, blah blah blah, and then I sat down at my gate in LA and just started bawling. And this is truly like probably one of the biggest things that I did not expect, and that like really threw me for a loop mentally. It's hard when you have that fear, but it's also not super easy to like tell yourself, oh my gosh, you're just being crazy, like I'm sure nothing's gonna happen. Like, got detained in the airport and questioned for 2 hours, and they unpacked all of my luggage and searched all of my luggage. In the best of times, I feel like I have 2 homes and I think it's so great, and at the worst of times, I feel like I have 0. Hello! Welcome back to another, well, I guess this won't really be a vlog. Welcome to another video, I should say. I'm getting ready to go make dumplings, and I don't know if I'm making ice cream, but my friend Addie has an ice cream maker and she's been making her own ice cream and gelato and stuff, so she's gonna bring some. We're gonna make some homemade dumplings. It'll be so cute. But I thought that I would talk a little bit about things I didn't expect about moving overseas. I have lived in Australia. I'm from America. I've lived in Australia for about 5 years now. So I feel like I am at a point where I have some advice to give. I have some words of wisdom, I guess. I feel like I've been here long enough that I have a good idea of what it's like to move overseas for a long period of time. Just doing my skincare. I thought it'd be boring if I just like sat down and talked about all this stuff, so I'm just gonna go about getting ready while I talk about it. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of background on like how I decided to move here. I first came to Australia with a little like travel organization called Rustic Pathways when I was 16. I came with my friend Amanda, shout out Amanda, and I was always like, ooh, maybe I should live here for like a year after college or something. Like I kind of had it in my head since that trip that maybe I would come back for a longer period of time. And so then I just like went about my life, started college at Elon University in North Carolina, and I visited that school 5 times. Like I thought I was gonna love it, but you know, things don't always go according to plan, and I ended up hating it. So I stayed at Elon for a year, and then I knew I wanted to transfer. So at the end of my 2nd semester, I was looking at other schools. Oh, the other missing piece is that when I was at Elon, I was planning on studying abroad in Australia because I loved it here so much. I was like, I'm just gonna go back. I don't care that I've been there before. I love it so much that I just want to go back. So I was already kind of set up to study abroad my sophomore year at a school in Australia. And so when I decided to transfer, I was like, let me give that school another little Google. So I Googled the school that I was originally going to study abroad at, and I was like, can I just go there? Like, can I just transfer there for the rest of my degree? And that's what I ended up doing. So I studied at the university that I was meant to study abroad at. So that's kind of what took me here. And then, so I finished my degree. I pretty much started my degree over because my credits barely transferred, but it's only a 3-year degree in Australia. Bachelors are 3 years because they don't have gen eds. So I did that, and then I just got so attached to it here that I didn't leave. So I'm still here. It's been almost 5 years and I'm still trucking over here. So I guess without further ado, I'll get into some of the things that I did not expect about moving overseas. And some of these are like small, silly, fun things, and some of these are like actually huge, life-altering like things. So the first one, I'm kind of gonna go in order, like chronologically, if you will. So the first thing that I didn't expect was how much cheaper university is here than it is in America. Because that was like the main thing, is I was worried that I was not gonna be able to afford to come here for university because the flights are so long and expensive and stuff. And I wanted to be able to go back and forth if I wanted to visit home. I didn't want to like be stuck here for 3 years straight. And so I was like, it might just be too expensive to move here with all the flights and stuff. But I didn't realize that uni here is like way, way, way cheaper than America. However, I did have to pay international student fees. But even with the international student fees, I was paying so much less than I would have been paying at Elon, that like I did all of my calculations and I was like, I could literally pay tuition and fly home and back to Australia every single semester if I wanted to. I could go home in between every single semester and I would still be paying a little bit less than what I would have been paying at Elon. So that's what really like convinced me that there was almost like no negative of trying. The next thing I didn't expect is I did not expect stepping into an Australian Target to be the thing that triggered my first breakdown when I moved here. So my lovely mom came here with me for the first time when I was moving in. She helped me settle and then she flew back home, which was so nice. I think it would have been so much scarier to move here without her coming with me, because I did move here alone in the sense that I didn't know anyone here. I didn't have family. I knew not a soul in this entire country. So it was nice that my mom at least came with me to like help set me up and get me a little bit settled. And I was so excited to move here. I took a gap semester in between Elon and moving here. So there was like quite a bit of buildup. Like I knew for like 6 months that I was moving here, and I like really never had a doubt in my mind that it was the right decision. Like I would get moments of being a little bit nervous, but like I never doubted that it was the right thing that I should do. But when I got here, obviously like there's a moment where you're just like, wow, I'm in Australia. I'm really here finally. I've done it. Like I'm moving in and my mom's gonna leave soon. And I was getting a little bit stressed, and to calm my nerves, we were like, all right, let's just start decorating your apartment. Let's go to Target. Target is the ultimate comfort store. Let's do that, get some stuff for your apartment, it'll be fun. So I'm already kind of on edge, like on the verge of kind of a panic attack kind of thing, just from the big change. And we step into Target, which is usually like my comfort place. I feel like every American woman knows the comfort that Target can bring. And Target in Australia, I don't even know if they're owned by the same people anymore, because it just does not hit at all. Like it's one of the worst department stores here. It's depressing, it's messy, they have nothing, it's just awful. And so I'm like already on the verge of a panic attack, and I think that Target is gonna be what saves me. But after walking through Target for like 15 minutes with my mom, I was dead silent the entire time, and then I just broke down. Like Target really pushed me to the breaking point. However, I got through it, and then once my mom did leave and I was just here by myself in my apartment by myself, no roommates, no one, I literally didn't know anyone. I was just waiting for uni to start so that I could meet people. What is kind of unexpected is that my first few days living alone in Australia were less scary to me than the first few days living in North Carolina when I went to Elon. And I think that can be attributed just to the fact that like when I moved to Elon, that was the first time I had lived anywhere outside of home. So it's like, even though North Carolina is way closer to home, it was way less scary. I mean, it was way scarier because I had literally never lived out of home before. And at least when I was moving to Australia, I had done it before, and I just like knew that Australia was gonna be like my vibe more than North Carolina was, you know? Another thing though is that I didn't expect there to be a language barrier. You move to Australia and you're like, perfect, best of both worlds, I'll get to live in a new country, but I can still speak the language, blah, blah, blah. I did not expect for there to be so many words that people said that I had never heard of in my entire life. Like there were so many times in the first few weeks of living here where I was like, what the fuck did you just say? For example, I remember my first week of school, I was meeting up with some like uni people to do a project or whatever. And we had a group chat and someone was like, should we meet at a cafe like tomorrow or whatever? And then someone said, yeah. And then someone said, Arvo, question mark? And then everyone was like, yeah, sounds good. And I was like, what is Arvo? And I literally asked them, I was like, is Arvo a cafe? Like, what are you talking about? And they died laughing because Arvo just means afternoon. But that was the first time that I was like, oh, there are actual words here that I straight up don't know. And then that just kept happening for the first like few months of living here. I would like hear words and have to ask people what they meant. Like, what are some other ones? Miso, servo, the tip, togs, bogan, chook, esky, sanga, like all these Australian words that I had just never heard of before, but they're in my vocabulary now. Also, just a side note, I think it's so funny how many people will ask me like how long I've been here, and when I tell them 4.5, 5 years, they're like, wow, you really haven't picked up the accent at all. And I'm like, who would? At the age of 23, do you really have the ability to pick up a different accent? I just think that's so funny that people are surprised that I still have an American accent. And also, like, I think it's so funny too, because if anything, when I go back to America, I almost try to sound more American than I actually sound. Like, I don't have the accent at all, but I have picked up like a lot of the vocabulary that people use here, because like obviously you just pick up the words that everyone around you is using. But when I go back to America, I deliberately try not to do that because it makes me feel cringe. Like, it makes me feel like if I go home and start like using all these Australian words, people are gonna think I'm such a pick-me. I just think it's funny. Along the same lines of uni, because like I said, I'm kind of going in chronological order. So this is we're still in the first few years of me living here. Another thing I didn't expect is for uni life to be so different here than it is in America. Like college life in America. Like in American college, it's basically like summer camp. Like you live on campus. Your whole life is around uni. Like for the first few years, you don't even have a car probably. Like you're in this bubble of college the whole time, and like all of your friends are college friends. Whereas here, none of my friends, with the exception of like 1 or 2, have been from uni. Like nobody lives on campus. There's not even on-campus housing. There's like an apartment complex right near the uni that a lot of people live at, but it is not the same vibe of American colleges. So it very much is like, as opposed to like going to college and living at college, it's just more, it just feels more like you're like living your life, and then you also happen to like be a student that's going to school sometimes. Like it's not as much your entire life as it is in America, which I honestly quite loved, but I could see why some people wouldn't like that if they're like really wanting the college experience, you know? Also, I did not expect to get stuck here for 2 years in a row without being able to go home, thanks to COVID. And because I was stuck here for 2 years straight, I also didn't expect the reverse culture shock to be as bad as it was. Literally, that breakdown in Target was the closest thing, was the closest that anything came to culture shock coming into Australia. But the culture shock of going back to America was like so much stronger to me than the culture shock of moving here in the first place. And this is truly like probably one of the biggest things that I did not expect, and that like really threw me for a loop mentally. So I was here for 2 years because of COVID, couldn't go home. So I was here for 2 years and then finally was able to go home. And I am very close with my family members, so I FaceTime them all the time, like probably at least once a week, if not more. And probably during COVID it might have been even more, just because it was like so crazy how long it had been since we had seen each other. So what I really didn't expect was that when I got home, it still felt like I hadn't seen them in 2 years. And it felt like it was this weird, really weird, disorienting feeling of like all of our FaceTime calls and conversations that we had when I was in Australia felt like they weren't real, felt like they went out the door. And it felt like I was back with these family members that I hadn't seen in 2 years. Like, it took me a really long time to like remember them. And that sounds so weird and confusing if you haven't been through this before. But I really didn't expect it because of how close I am with them and how close I've always been with them. But those first few days being back in America, staying at my mom's house with my mom and sister, were the weirdest vibes I've ever experienced in my entire life. And it was like really hard and sad because I had been building up coming home in my head for so long. I was so excited to finally be able to see them. And eventually it was exactly what I wanted it to be. But those first few days, you know, jet lagged and haven't seen them for literally 2 years, were so freaking weird. And the other aspect of the reverse culture shock was just landing in the LA airport and being among Americans for the first time. And like, I don't want to like shit on Americans and say that they're all like rude as fuck, whatever. But the LA airport specifically, going through customs, people are angsty. Their like temper and patience is like not, I don't know, people are on edge. And so the second that I got through LA, I was just like manic mode, like going through customs, getting to my gate, blah blah blah. And then I sat down at my gate in LA and just started bawling because the vibe was just so bad. And like, at least, like, again, I don't want to generalize that Americans are rude and Australians aren't, but like, at least the airport where I live, like the Sunshine Coast Airport and the Brisbane Airport, everyone's so nice. It's not the same as like cranky security TSA people in America. Like, everyone is just so friendly, and I had been used to that for 2 years. And then my first experience back in America being LA Customs, where everyone's like yelling at you literally and being like straight up rude, I was just like so taken aback and like scared. I was like, this does not feel like home. I'm scared. I hate this. So that was just weird. Really, really didn't expect the reverse culture shock to be that bad. And it honestly did happen pretty much every time I went home after that. I thought that it was just because I had been here for 2 whole years. But the next few times that I went home, the same thing kind of happened. So now I've come to expect that when I go home, I'm gonna feel weird vibes for like a week before like settling back in. Another thing is that I didn't expect to just keep dating Americans when I moved here. I was like so excited, and everyone would like tease me being like, oh, you're gonna go like meet Australian boys, you're gonna have an Australian husband, that's so fun, blah blah blah. But I've only dated 2 people since being here, one of them being my current partner, and both of them were American. And I think that's just because when you're so far away from home, when you hear that American accent and someone like knows where you came from and like really feels like home, that like goes such a long way in making you feel like comfortable around someone really quickly. And it's not only like what we have in common is being American, what we also have in common is moving overseas at a young age, like by ourselves. And so that's just like so much instant bonding and like instant connection that comes. So it's just like very easy to like find and connect with other Americans as opposed to Australians. But I didn't expect that. I also didn't expect Australia to feel like so much of a bubble. And it might just be the town that I live in, but I've only lived in this one area of the coast for the entire time I've lived here, so I don't know what it's like to live in other parts of Australia. But what I've gathered is that it is such a bubble, and like, I remember loving it because I felt like it was so progressive here. I was like, I don't know, there's almost no racism, homophobia, that kind of thing. But part of me, in fact a lot of me now, thinks that it's just because there's way less diversity. Like, there's not as much room for racism and homophobia and stuff because it's such a undiverse bubble. So where I once thought that like this was a great like progressive area kind of thing, I now realize that it might be the opposite. It might just be like a completely undiverse area, and that's why there's not a lot of those like negative feelings around it, you know? And along the same lines of it being a bubble and reverse culture shock and all of that stuff, the other thing I didn't expect is that I feel so safe in Australia that now when I go home, I feel very unsafe. I didn't realize how safe I felt in Australia until I went back to America and was very, very on edge anytime I was in public. And I don't want to shit on America and like feed into the idea that it's this like incredibly violent place, but I feel like I've turned into one of those people that is scared of America because I don't live there and I see all of the headlines and hear of all of the scary things that are happening there. And it's weird because I feel like when I was growing up there, I didn't feel as unsafe as I feel now going back, because it's just like the comparison and the like stark contrast of how I feel here versus how I feel at home. That's another thing that really bothers me that I like have to kind of get through in that first week of being back in America is I'll feel very on edge, like just walking around the grocery store, like being in a parking lot, like anywhere in a public place, especially with like lots of people that I don't know. I feel very, very on edge and just like really just scared, which I'm really trying to get through. And like it's hard when you have that fear, but it's also not super easy to like tell yourself, oh my gosh, you're just being crazy, like I'm sure nothing's gonna happen. Like it really is a way more dangerous place than Australia is. So it's kind of hard to figure out how much I want to overcome that fear. You know what I mean? So that's something I didn't expect, is that kind of weird, unsafe vibe that I feel now when I go back home. Another thing that I didn't expect is that I felt like this was the right decision from the moment I got here. Again, like there were scary moments just because it's a big change, but I felt so at peace with my decision the second I got here. However, it took me like a year or a year and a half for it to actually feel like home. Like the first friend group I had here is not the friend group I have now. Even the second friend group I had is not the friend group I have now. I don't even think the third friend group I had is the one I have now. I think this is like my fourth friend group, and this is the one that like truly feels like family. And the same goes for my apartment. Like my first apartment, I was thriving. I like thought that I was in my peak. I was so happy. It was like such an exciting time, but I didn't feel like home and like settled into home until I moved in with my friends into my second apartment. And now in this big share house, I feel like so at home. I also didn't expect to miss American seasons so much. And I don't mean like I miss cold winters or whatever, because obviously there are places in America that have warm winters and there are places in Australia that have cold winters. It's not necessarily the weather that I miss. It's more like I miss the way that America as a whole celebrates seasons. I miss the way that fall is romanticized with like blankets and pumpkin candles and pumpkin drinks and like all the quintessential fall stuff. Pumpkin patches, fall leaves, like all this stuff that like symbolizes fall. And I miss in winter being by the fireplace, having like flannel blankets and like jazz playing and warm like Christmas drinks, peppermint stuff. Like I miss all of that. I miss the way that America makes each season feel like new beginnings. I miss the way that they're romanticized. I joke with my mom that nothing hits like American consumerism, because that's obviously like where it can all be traced back to, but I really just do miss it. Here, there are really only two seasons, like hot summer and slightly cooler. And like really the only difference between the two is the weather. There's no one's like collectively implementing a palpable vibe change, you know? And I also did not expect to get this attached to Australia. Not just cause I'm like, oh my god, I love Australia, I could never go back to America. Attached in the way that like so much of my life is intertwined with everything here. Like I am so intertwined with people here, friends here, my partners here, hobbies here, my job here. Like I would have to sever so many ties in order to move home. Like honestly, even more ties than I broke when I moved here in the first place. Like I feel like I have more life set up here than I had in America when I was 19 before I moved here. And along those lines, I didn't expect that very fact to spark a quarter-life existential crisis that I still don't know how to get out of. What started out as me thinking it would be a cool experience to do uni over here has resulted in me now having to decide whether I want to go set up my adult life in the country where all of my family is, or if I want to set up my adult life in this country where my partner is, my friends are, my job is, my hobbies are, like everything. Not to mention the fact that another thing I didn't expect is that the minimum wage here is so much higher and the cost of living is so much lower. So it is just way easier to live here. There's no way I could be living in a beach house in America only working 3 days a week. Like, there's no fucking way. But no matter how unbelievably too good to be true it seems here sometimes, the fact that none of my family is here has me constantly begging the question whether it's the right thing for me to be here or not. And you might be thinking, Phoebe, if you've been there for 5 years already, surely you can just get citizenship and then you can go back and forth, or you can move home and then come back if you want to. Like, just get citizenship so that you can be either place. But no, because of another thing I didn't expect, which is that the visa, residency, citizenship situation is so fucking complicated here. I have spent an ungodly number of hours and dollars trying to navigate the visa situation, and this is partially because I've made some choices that have like complicated my visa abilities, whatever. But also partially because the Department of Home Affairs here makes zero sense to me. One time I had to fly to New Zealand by myself to be able to fix a visa situation while not being in the country of Australia. So I flew to New Zealand, got detained in the airport and questioned for 2 hours, and they unpacked all of my luggage and searched all of my luggage because they thought it was sketchy that I was going to New Zealand for only 2 days by myself. And then I sorted my visa situation out, went to the airport in New Zealand to fly back to Australia with my new visa. And then they didn't let me on the plane and they told me that my visa had been canceled. And I asked them why, and they couldn't tell me. They said they didn't know. So I had to stay in New Zealand. I was stuck there for like a week total, on the phone with lawyers, trying to figure out what happened with my visa. And it did get sorted. But it just goes to show that even the simplest of visas are like so complicated, and so many weird things can go wrong that really only a lawyer will like understand. Before I moved here, I kind of naively thought that if you've lived here for a certain amount of time, surely you can just apply for citizenship. Like, surely you can just take a test and do all these background checks and like apply for citizenship or whatever. But no, really the only way that I can live here permanently is to either get a partnership visa, which is like a green card, the equivalent of a green card marriage, which I can't do because my partner is American. And you can't fake a partnership. They make it really fucking impossible. So can't do that. I can't do a business permanent residency kind of thing because you have to have a business that made over $200,000 a year, which I don't have. Or there is like a state nominated way to get a visa, but for that you have to work for 2 years full-time in your field of study, which I can't do because my current visas are gonna run out before the end of those 2 years. So I don't even have time to rack up 2 years full-time work before my visas run out. And also, I don't even want to work in my field of study. I'm over it. I don't want to work in it anyway. And like all of that is boiled down so much. Like, there are also so many restrictions to all the temporary visas that make it near impossible to be preparing for a permanent visa. Like, the way everything is structured, it's almost like they are discouraging, they're doing anything they can to discourage people from getting a permanent visa, which I really don't understand because I feel like if anything, it would help their economy. So I don't know. It's just so confusing. Like, I've heard so many stories of people who tried to get permanent residency and then ultimately just gave up because it's so hard here. Literally the only international people I know who are on permanent visas here either have a partnership visa with their actual Australian partner, or are literally lying to get sponsored and are living a secret life, which sounds really fucking stressful and also illegal. So the option we're currently looking at is CJ doing the state nominated route because he does have enough time in his visas to do 2 years full-time work in his field, and he actually likes his field. So we're just hoping and praying that I can get added on to his visas as his partner. But obviously, like, it is really complicated, and like, we don't know how sure of a thing it is that I will be able to successfully get on his visa as a partner. And like, it really does suck to put all the pressure on him to get both of us to stay here. You know, it's just like kind of overwhelming and time consuming and just a lot. Hopefully this video doesn't just feel like me oversharing for 20 minutes straight, but I wanted to give a real life example of how complicated this stuff can be, because I feel like anyone who follows me on social media, like even just friends from back home and stuff, probably has no idea that there's this whole other layer of living abroad that is like really a lot to handle. But you know, overall, the reasons why it's so hard and complicated is because of how great it is living here. Like, my decision would be so easy if living here sucked. I would just move home. And obviously, like, the character building of moving here alone and setting up my life here and stuff is like such a life-changing confidence booster that like I obviously have literally zero regrets of moving here in the first place, even though it's kind of tricky now. The other thing I kind of wanted to touch on before I end this video, not me taking my pants off while I'm on camera, but I'm getting dressed. The other thing I wanted to touch on is that I feel like for a little bit, part of me got stuck in the mindset of like, oh my God, Australia's so amazing, like America sucks. Not really, but like that kind of thing, like fuck my hometown kind of thing. But then there just came a time, I think through COVID, where I realized I just really didn't want my love for Australia to take away all of my appreciation of my hometown and America in general. Like, yes, I think it's great to leave your hometown and like explore and see what else is out there, but I also don't think that kind of rolling your eyes at where you came from is enlightened at all. So the last thing I'll say is that I really do recommend taking that leap of faith if you want to move abroad or just move cities or states or whatever. I feel like the confidence boost you get from doing something scary and bold and being super independent can kind of turn into a superiority complex on accident. Not in an obvious way where you're like, wow, I can't believe that they're still living in their hometown, or like, oh my God, I'm so much better than them because I moved. Like, hopefully no one actually has that level of judgmental thoughts. But even just the subconscious belief that like everyone would be happier if they tried moving, or if they got out of their hometown, or like everyone would be happier if they took a risk and moved somewhere alone and like built their life independently, whatever. Like, I think that belief can be really easy to adopt when you're riding the high of doing that stuff yourself. But I think it's really important to remember that happiness comes in different ways to everybody. And it's not even that I've been judgmental of other people necessarily. It's more just that I came to a point where I realized like, yeah, moving to another country is really cool, but it's not cool to take your hometown for granted. Like, I think people look at moving abroad as something like cool and admirable. I honestly think it's just as admirable to be able to build your dream life wherever you are. So while I do think it's okay for me to be proud of myself for moving out here and building my life here, I also sometimes think that it would have been even scarier for me to build my life in my hometown. There's something that's harder about building your dream life and finding happiness in a place that you're totally sick of versus running away to this place that's like cheaper and beautiful and has beaches and has like all these things that are objectively great. Like, it's almost not as hard to find happiness in a place like that. So I don't know, it's just food for thought. I don't think either is better than the other. I'm not saying I've realized that living at home is braver than living abroad or vice versa. Like, just food for thought, because I guess that's the last thing that I didn't expect about moving abroad is having kind of a complicated relationship with home and like going back and forth really between which one I see as home and which one I see as right for me. And so I'm kind of now trying to get to a place where they both feel like home, because I've often felt sometimes like I have 0 homes rather than having 2. I think in the best of times I feel like I have 2 homes and I think it's so great, and at the worst of times I feel like I have 0 real homes, you know. All right, I'm officially done getting ready. I'm just wearing this top and these jeans. Very simple. I hope this video was either helpful if you're thinking of moving, or just moved or gonna move, or at least just entertaining if you're interested in hearing about this stuff. Let me know if you have any questions. Leave questions in the comments if you have any, if there's anything that I missed that you are curious about. Other than that, have a good rest of your morning, day, evening, night, whatever, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye guys!